Hello, everyone. Welcome. Brenton here. I've got Talisha with me as well.
Hey, everyone. My power is going in and out. So Brennan is leading the live stream today. Everybody go, yay.
All right,
I'm
welcome,
going to
everyone.
pretend you all said yay.
Everyone here, can you hear me? Just checking. Someone in chat, say hello.
Hello. Hello. Hello. Can you hear us? Can you see us? Is there anybody here? Okay, there are people here. Okay,
All right.
great. Hello. All right, I'm Talisha, by the way. This is Brennan, if you don't know. And he's going to have some housekeeping for everybody participating in Lovable Shift.
So, welcome. You made it to week 2. As some of you realize, there are some things on this platform that we need to focus on. So, just one moment. I've got sort of double back. Sorry. There we go. Sorry, my system's playing it back to me twice. So, as you're aware, we had some issues with the platform, which we've been working on. That's impacted our point system. As you're aware, the leaderboard wasn't quite where we wanted it. So, for this first week, to make sure everyone has a playing field that's level, because some people couldn't vote as well, we're going to have to skip the points on the first week. That's a bit of a setback, we know. But we're going to come up with a solution to fix that. For everyone that submitted an update, we're going to give you 50 credits each. It's not a perfect solution, but it does mean that you get to build more. It does mean that everyone gets a fair chance throughout this course. So we're expecting this next week will be fixed. If you look at the leaderboard, you'll see that there is a bit more of a level playing field there. So they've fixed the way the leaderboard presented, and now we're just working on the ability to vote issues that some people had last week. So by the time you vote this weekend, you'll be good to go. So other than that, I've got some things to talk about as well. Some small wins. I just wanted to point out that Lasney got 36 sign-ups on his waitlist. Beautiful. Also got another 53 sign-ups by Sylvian on their waitlist for the early adopters. Beautiful. First paying customers, Eve. Fantastic work. I love the look of your the icons you're building there. Fantastic. Mez, first paying customer as well on your app there. That's fantastic. Who else? First dollar made online. That's a good feeling. Summit, good work. All right.
Yes. Confetti for everybody.
Confetti. Yes, we love the confetti. Good work. So yeah. Other than that, we've got a couple guests joining us today. Jonah and Tim. I'm going to bring them on shortly. Talisha, was there anything I missed there you wanted to touch on?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay. Perfect. All right. We're going to bring the guys in. If you guys have any questions, feel free to just message me in Circle. I try to get back to everything I can. If you tag me somewhere, I'm going to see it. I might not get you within the first couple of hours, but I do get you every single day. So just message me. Thanks, everyone. Welcome, Tim, Jonah. Thanks for coming in.
Hello. Welcome.
Hey, guys.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Perfect. Oh, we'll let you guys get to the conversation, but I'll just give a quick rundown. Some of you would have saw for Tim is from Nucleus. Jonah has previous work with Superpower. I don't know what you're working on at the moment, Jonah. It's a bit of a secret, they say. Can't say anything. But I hear it's big. It's got to be big.
Thank you. Tim knows. Actually, I've had so many offline conversations with Tim about this, which is funny. But we'll hope to add as much value as we can to the Lovable community today.
Beautiful. And we'll have some Q&A at the end, everyone. I'll leave it to you guys. Thanks, guys.
Very cool.
Yeah, maybe we can start with some quick intros. But first of all, just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. It's a super exciting time to be designing, building, and hopefully making some money online, it sounds like. I've been in design product for about roughly 8 years now. I started out not knowing much about design, but being really interested in startups and building stuff. So I studied design and entrepreneurship at USC. It was kind of a cool program that combined engineering, design, and business into one. In college, I kind of tried my hand working in big tech, realized it wasn't for me. So started working in startups and never looked back. Most of my career so far has been in New York, but I grew up in Los Angeles, so I've got a bit of a surfer bum at heart. I really love working on small teams that have like big aspirations and are taking big swings to the world. Been kind of lucky to work with some amazing people, including Jonah, and that's kind of helped influence and shape my thoughts and experiences around design and craft and entrepreneurship. My first job was at Raya, which is, for those who don't know, like a dating app. And I remember my first day, like my boss turns out was the guy who helped ship and design the like button at Facebook. So it was really cool to be able to work with people like that and learn from them early in my career. After that, I moved to New York and started working at a startup called wap.com, which is like an online e-commerce marketplace. There were just 5 of us at the time, and we were all working in the founder's apartment in Brooklyn. And I lived in Soho at the time, which is across the river, which was like 30-minute commute. So I ended up buying a camping mattress and staying in their laundry room on the weekdays and then commuting home on the weekends to get an extra hour of sleep. So, you can tell it's a very intense environment, but at that time in life, it was a really exciting, place to be. And I learned a ton while I was there. And it was really kind of during that experience that I sharpened my teeth as a designer, and really focused on like being quick and speedy as a designer as well. And it was a really cool time to be there. The company grew from like $100,000 in GMV to 100 million, so 100x in the few years I was there, which was incredible. And so that was a really cool experience. And then most recently, as mentioned, I'm the head of design at a biotech startup called Nucleus Genomics, and we're building tools to help people live longer and have healthy kids.
Pretty cool. What Tim also doesn't know about this is that I actually met my future wife through Raya, but in a way that you wouldn't imagine. Where
No
I was
way.
on Raya, and I actually had a mutual connection to her through my sister, and so she never saw my profile, but I had gotten on Raya that day, and then within 3 hours of being on the app, I deleted it. So their design skills had something, I guess, to do with positive nature of my life. But my background is somewhat similar. I've been in design for about, I want to say, 10 years now. Maybe a little earlier, considering all the other things I did from just an entrepreneurship growing up. But I went to school in upstate New York, and before that, in high school and college, I worked in advertising agencies as a copywriter and designer. I loved painting though, and I love photography, and I've traveled so many different countries, and ultimately put all of those different tools together into being a little bit of a Swiss Army knife. And after college, I moved to Hong Kong to do international photography. So I lived across Asia for 9 months. And then I moved to London to be the head of growth and design for a fintech company. From there, I started an agency called Vasco Creative. I was doing full service design work, but it's the opposite of what I would advise any of you to do, because it was basically hourly work at a zero leverage type of capacity. And I would take on any type of design work you could imagine. So there was no process I got to get really good at. And it was just working with clients on retainer basis. So it was very, very tiring. It was like doing 10 jobs at once. Ultimately, I ended up starting a mental health company that we bootstrapped for 2 years, and then raised venture money, and then ran it for another 2 years before it got acquired by another longevity company called Superpower. And then I joined as the 4th largest shareholder and the head of product, also leading design and brand work. And after doing that for a year and really getting my hands deep, I had a bunch of founder friends reach out to me saying, Jonah, we love the work that you did with Superpower. Would you ever help us do ours? And so I left and I started a solo studio, a brand studio, and I work with some of the best venture-backed founders. And I really try to do everything I can on the front of building brands, building landing pages, building the launch assets, and doing everything kind of like as a one-man army. And that really probably ties into what Lovable does, because I'm constantly trying to find ways to automate more of my process, think through different templates. And I've had conversations with Tim before behind the scenes about Nucleus and the work that they're doing. And I think that there's a lot of cool synergies. So hopefully in our combo, we can talk about things that will help you. And I know that this is oriented on everyone having their own company and trying to use Lovable and other design knowledge to get customers launch their startups. So maybe like the first question I have for Tim, because I'm really curious, like Nucleus has obviously done a great job with marketing, but I'm curious, like, how do you guys use design thinking when it comes to Nucleus? And for those who aren't familiar, you definitely need to go on Twitter or LinkedIn or anywhere and just follow and see all the work that they're doing, because it'll definitely help inform how they approach launching, because they've done a tremendous job of it.
Yeah, totally. Let's see. So for Nucleus, it's a healthcare company, and I think historically healthcare companies have had like terrible design. So at like a very high level, that's kind of one thing we're trying to do is like make like consumer health companies cool again. And obviously Superpower has done an amazing job of that as well. I think compared to like past companies I've worked at, this one feels like the most where like the marketing, branding, and growth are all like very much part of what I do on a day-to-day basis in addition to product design. Getting off the ground like a very early stage like this, it's like so important to think about how it's going to be perceived and like how like the marketing side actually leads to the product and vice versa. Um, so that's been like a pretty cool learning of how to tie those two together.
Very cool. That's super interesting.
Jonah, question for you. Like,
go for it.
I feel like you have like such a diverse background, creatively speaking, like with photography and then design. How does like the photography aspect like shape your design process? Because I actually started off as a photographer too. I don't know if I told you that.
No, that's awesome. That's actually a really great angle, and I'm really curious how everyone is going to think about my answer. My answer would be photography informs a lot of my design process because I think people think about brand as just the logo and the colors, but I think about it more as also the visual identity plus the social capital you're going to build when people are thinking about what you're doing and how they're going to talk to their friends about it. And I think with tools like Midjourney and all of the other, AI image generation tools out there, I think if you're really good at understanding photography, you can prompt them and train them really well. Customize, if any of you are familiar with the terminology of Midjourney, there's things like S references, which are image references. You can also use omni references, which is to create a character that is the same across all of the images you generate. And I leverage all of the skills that I would use behind a camera, and I use it for prompting. And it's been incredible because a couple of the brands that I helped build have gone all in on doing everything with AI. And this came from, 2 years ago, I was leading a big photo shoot with Superpower where we had all these beautiful models and we spent a ton of money, around 300K, on building out this really professional photo shoot. And that became a really big part of one of the core design features of our website, where there's this cool wormhole through the eye of a model named Olivia. And nowadays, all that stuff can be done basically for a $20 a month subscription. And I'm not saying that there isn't still an amazing use case for models and real shoots, because there definitely is. But I think if you are a brand that's trying to ship things quickly and make something that's like near perfect, but not obviously as perfect as a real photo shoot or real people, I think using tools like Midjourney or other image generation like Visual Electric, et cetera, are really great angles to try. Honestly, something I'm curious for you guys in Nucleus, or just in general, Tim, with you just being a designer, like when you think about tech stack, like Lovable is obviously competing with Bolt, and there's all these other tools out there like Replit, et cetera. Lovable is amazing though, because they're helping, ship something with just natural language. I'm curious, when you think about design, whether it's Nucleus or just your own life, like what is the stack that you think has helped make you faster or helped you ship better designs quicker without as much leverage, with more leverage? I mean, I'm really curious what your take on is that.
Yeah, I think like for one, the tools are definitely changing for the better. People who like wouldn't even consider themselves a designer or an engineer are now able to ship like amazing things, which is really cool. So I feel like more people on our team are like, contributing to the design process, which is really fun. In terms of like the tools that I use more often now, definitely spend most of my time in Figma still, which I think is always going to be a case as a UI UX designer, right? But I also spend a lot of time in Framer building websites. And a lot of the content that I use, like traditionally, I'd have to either take the photos myself or hire a photographer to do it. Like you said, now that's like $20 a month, and it's super easy to do, which is really cool. So you can get like a MVP of something up and running in like less than a day, which maybe used to take a week or a month even. So that's really exciting. And then with things like Lovable, it's like kind of pushing me to rethink my own design process a bit, and what I'm capable of, because there's certainly things that you just can't design in Figma. Like a lot of really cool things require like some sort of coded logic in order to make it work, especially with animations and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like pushing me to think about, where is the design engineer handoff? Like, how far should I go? Should I like be engineering the thing myself, which is really cool, and vice versa? Should the engineers be designing things themselves as well? And the answer is yes to both of those. So that's a really exciting part for our team right now, is that like the engineering design team is becoming a lot more like blurred, which is good. Like we're even struggling internally to figure out the names of the roles and who's managing who, because we're all kind of doing each other's job in a way, which is cool.
Yeah, I think that this leads kind of the same angle of there's going to be more design-led founders and non-technical people who might have had not have had the same capability of building deep engineering products are now able to be at the forefront of launching things and building them all the way from start to finish. I do think that as Lovable and all of its competitors that all of you are familiar with, continue to explode, I think that they are going to be used in the design process a lot for really clear prototyping. So like for me, for example, while I still leverage Figma as my primary design tool, and I don't at this moment see Lovable replacing that, I do see Lovable being a part of my process of using it to understand layouts for landing pages and give me a lot more inspiration. And it's almost like it can generate mood boards and, like you said, all the animations really quickly of like what interaction should we build in here. I think that's really, really critical. I myself tend to be using Webflow more than Framer. I know you guys use Framer. And I think one of the things that's really important on the back end of this also is thinking about the short term and how that plays into the long term of building a business. Like using Lovable or Framer or Webflow are all great, but ultimately you need to be able to think about the foundation of how this is going to build for domain authority, your SEO, also LLM SEO for how you're going to be pulled from AI engines. And whatever people are going to build, you want it to be easy for anyone inside of your team to be able to maintain. And I think some of the content management system infrastructure of Framer and Webflow is still really superior to a lot of tools. And I'm really excited actually as Lovable comes out and continues to build tools on top of what it's done, because it's definitely pushing all of them to be better too. And it's like creating more competition in the space, which I think is always really good. I also think, Figma Sites, which was a really big part of this last few months update, was a splashy launch, but I haven't seen it used by any designers I know yet. And I think the main reason for this is because it takes a long time to build a strong ecosystem of all of the core tools you need to build on the web. And while there are really flashy new AI updates all the time, something like Lovable is actually really rare, the fact that it's grown as fast as it has, because it's really hard to compete with entrenched big competitors. And I'm sure, Tim, you guys can speak about that with like maybe the go-to-market side of how design impacts go-to-market, because there was 23andMe, there's Ancestry that's out there. There's a lot of these big other longevity companies that are even tangential to what Nucleus is doing. And design is a really core differentiator. And I think design is also not just, like I said, the logos or the colors. It's also how you speak about things. It's the environment and the story you're designing. So it's also the storytelling. And that's something that you guys have thought, really extensively on. And I know that that's been a big part of your background too. So I'm really just curious, how do you think about storytelling meets design as a wedge to be better at your business?
Yeah, well, I think design is one of the main ways that we can help communicate emotion to people, right? And so there's like that famous quote, like design is the silent salesman. And it's certainly something I certainly subscribe to that, where it's like you could like sell the product before people even know if they want it, just based on design. And especially, like I said, when we're thinking about these like healthcare companies that, have been the same way for a long time and don't really make you feel anything. That's a huge lever that we can pull as designers at Nucleus and elsewhere is being able to make this is something that people like desire, and so that's kind of something that we're trying to do at Nucleus. Kind of speaking on your previous point, like I think that a lot of these tools have helped us achieve more as a small team. Like I think the stuff that we built at Nucleus 10 years ago would have taken a team like maybe 10 times as large. It's just like incredible how much you can accomplish as a small team now, which is really cool. I think one of the most important like roles of a designer in any team is the ability to explore possibilities. So exploring different things of what could be, right? Usually consumers only see the final like artifact of what you've worked on, be it a website or a product or a sculpture or whatever it is. But in reality, day to day, there's like hundreds of versions that never get shipped that are either iterated upon or deleted or changed. But that's actually like a core part of the process. And so I think all these tools are really helping us explore more possibilities more quickly before converging on a solution, which is a really powerful thing because ultimately the final solution will be a lot better because of it.
I think that's a really good point. I feel like that also has to do with just how people engage with designers and whether you consider yourself a designer or not. Because from my experience, when I started working with startups or just anything in the creative world since I was, like 15 years old. And I think standard agency models are no longer something that really works for a lot of startups, and they just don't work because you have to find people in-house, or you have to be able to leverage these tools on your own. And I think it's because on one hand, if you don't have product market fit, you do not want to overinvest in design that may have to change, or it's just too complex for your team right now. But on the other hand, you don't want to underspend because you know bad design when you see it, and so your customers and your investors and potential hires. And I think that's an angle of design that a lot of people forget, is that like design is not just speaking for your customers. It speaks towards people who are going to fund you, who are going to join your team, for the press who's going to consider, how are we going to post about them, and what way do they get differentiated. It's really interesting to think about design, crossing these chasms. Personally for me, like I've been running my solo studio, and I couldn't do anything that I do right now as a solo person without all the tools that have come up in the last 6 months. Like my workflow is very heavily using, Midjourney and ChatGPT, Lovable, other types of generation tools. I spend a lot of time still on Pinterest for inspiration, but there's still like a lot of things that have been done on top of it. And actually, I've recently hired one of my friends part-time to help me build automated tools internally for me to help me with my process that I built. And I think that makes things, significantly easier. So I don't know. I think it's very cool, and I know that there's going to be a lot of questions here as well for people to ask us about our experience. But I'm also really curious. I think that the whole community, as using these tools, is going to find millions of additional use cases. And I think that that's what I've seen on design Twitter the most, is just seeing how people leverage these tools. One other tool that I know that's very different than Lovable. So I'm on the creative board of a company called Flora Fauna, and they're a node-based design system, and they've raised a bunch of venture money. And interestingly, they will allow you to build a workflow where you can drag one thing to the next, and then you can click run, and it will generate videos using Google's VO3 model, and it will generate animations, and it will generate images, and it will do all of it in a repeatable way where then you could train other people to do it. So I think ultimately some area that design is going towards is that people have to continue to come up with the creative vision, because I've yet to see any type of AI think orthogonally in a way that is really meaningful. They're really great at converging to the mean of what you'd expect something to build, but I haven't seen anything that has been something that's dramatically different. One example, one of the most recent bits of work that I did that went public is there's a Sequoia-backed company called Crosby, and they're a legal company. And this is interesting for me because both my parents are lawyers. So I grew up in this world, very different world. And most legal law firms and websites are something that, like Lovable would instantly be able to replicate because they're all the same. Like every single one of those websites has a picture of all the lawyers on their website, and they're very like serif-based fonts, and they're old and very like, they're just very janky, and I wanted to build something that was much more unique. And so I thought about the fact that Mark Rothko, the painter, is really interesting because a lot of lawyers love art, and my dad loves art, and like hanging on the wall of a lot of lawyers' offices is beautiful art. So I thought, what if there's a way for us to use something like the metaphor of Mark Rothko, but bringing it to the legal world? And that's what we ended up using. And I've been trying desperately to train all the different AI tools to understand how I've been doing that, but they've just completely failed at getting anywhere near close. So I don't know. I'm curious, Tim, how do you guys think about metaphor, or just in general, the idea of taste being added into the design work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, whenever AI fails, it's always a little bit reassuring because we still have work for the next few years. It's not taking our jobs just yet. I love that anecdote of getting inspiration from art and bringing that into the world. I think that's what we need more of, honestly. I think kind of early in my career, I kind of fell in the trap of like getting inspiration from like Dribble and online sources. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of great designers on Dribble and other places. But I think it kind of is like a very narrow view of the world. I think there's so much other things outside of design and even tech that you can pull inspiration from, whether it be music or art or nature. And so I've been trying to lean on that a lot more recently, and just like finding cool inspiration outside of the tech world and bringing that in. And I think in a way that makes the designs and the products a lot more human.
Yeah,
Jonah,
totally
I'm curious for you, like, there's never been more design work out there in the world, and it's never been easier to find it, and Dribble being one example. Who do you like look to for design inspiration these days? And who do you see as like the leaders in the design world? I think at one point, obviously Apple was like kind of like the top of that, and maybe things are changing a little bit, it feels like. Who do you look to now?
That's a really interesting point. Let me think on that. I think I would answer it maybe in two angles. One, the way that I think about design work is that everyone can now be a base level designer, but the ability to offer the most premium offering still stands for people who have really strong networks and who've also done it before. So I think the thing that's really nice about no matter how good AI tools get is that people always want the reassurance of like this person has succeeded before, so let's work with
Yeah.
them. And I also think that AI is not as good as at selling as real human relationships are. And that's because even when AI becomes infinitely available, human time and human life is more scarce, therefore making it more valuable. Like you're never going to get back this 30 minutes or 45 minutes you're spending with me, Tim. So technically that's so much more valuable than any type of token on Lovable or ChatGPT or anything else, because like we're going to die one day unless Brian Johnson or you guys figure out a way to make it so that we don't die. And if that's the case, you know, like we're in a really interesting position of saying that like this time is spent really, really, really premium. When it comes to inspiration, a company that I just have always admired and loved from the beginning is the browser company of New York. They built Arc, the browser, and also now this new product, Dia. I wouldn't say that I'm like a diehard fan of thinking that every decision that they made is phenomenal. But what I really like about what they've done is that they've taken something that is so ubiquitous and they've really brought design principle thinking forward, and specifically UX. And I think a lot of the time people bunch UX and UI together and they assume that they're the same role. And I actually think right now a lot of people are trying to make them the same role because everyone can use ChatGPT, etc. But I really still see them as being like two completely different core competencies. And people who are amazing at UX are people like Nikita Beer, who's just like he makes a lot of times the ugliest apps, and like he's very aware of that. Like there's nothing about them that's like pretty from a aesthetic perspective, but the functionality is always like top tier superb, and every action is perfectly placed. And people like him make me, you know, just think it's really interesting to consider what that is. I also really love the My First Million guys, and I don't love that. Like, they're not someone who's like, you know, pushing pixels in Figma. And but I think that the way that they speak about storytelling, specifically Sean, like I think Sam's amazing too, but like Sean, the way that Sean talks about storytelling and brings in audiences, I think is a really important part of design, which is to remember that anytime you build anything, it's meant to accomplish some type of goal. It might be to be pretty, it might be to raise money, it might be to help a customer, it might be to make something more understandable or easier to get towards. But I think like if you're building something without a purpose in mind, you're not really telling the story properly. And I think that the best designers understand that like you're taking someone on a journey, no matter how long or short it is. And I really value that. So I'd say, yeah, Dia, the browser, is doing that as well. And that's why I think the Arc team is really cool, is because they built a product that everyone loved, and then they said, we're not going to keep building it. And everyone's like, well, why wouldn't you do that? And they're like, well, we have this conviction for something else. I guess the final point is I would say I think a lot of legacy companies no longer have to rely on great design. Like Apple is not innovated much in a long time because they're just spending a lot of their energy on maintaining IP and thinking about themselves as like a big growth stage company that just is dealing with a balance sheet. So they're more like great financial people as opposed to really good at thinking about product. And I think that there's a lot of tools right now that are coming out like Lovable that are honestly doing a lot more to push the boundary. Like I know of a company called Sequence.film, which is doing Figma for video editing, and they have like rebuilt a fluid timeline engine and are doing all these crazy design things. And like to me, that's so much more interesting and more innovation. And on the other side, like I know a biosciences company that's doing something very different than you guys, which is they're helping create a world where drugs don't have side effects because there's this technology called chirality. And chirality is a new way of splitting a molecule in half and getting rid of the bad side. And I just think that that's fascinating too. So like design thinking can be brought towards any type of vertical. One other one I guess I would say is like I'm very inspired by Boom, the supersonic planes, and also Rainmaker with what Augustus is doing with his company that helps cloud seeding, because they're just things that like normally everyday people would take for granted. So what I love about design is taking something that like you might have walked by 100 times, and since someone can go like 10 layers deeper, and that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, totally. The psychology of design is you can go so deep. It's also so simple and fundamental as well when you think about, how humans work. We like stories, we like listening to stories. And some of the most basic forms of emotional communication are things that, we as designers can use in our toolkit, which is pretty cool. Full
Yeah.
transparency, I'm using Arc browser right now, so I'm also a fan. I
Yeah.
feel like that one of the design quotes that always kind of I come back to is like design's not how something looks, it's how something works. And I feel like that's like such an important thing for designers of all stages to like think about all the time, because I think a lot of times designers get pigeonholed as like the people that are supposed to make something look pretty. But aesthetics are just one of the many tools we have in our toolkit to achieve a goal. If the goal is to make, for example, with liquid death, maybe the goal is to make the water look different and make you feel like you're at a concert, right? Yes, Justin, I am trapped in a closet right now. And I'm in a call booth. I've been reading the chat. Sorry. But that's like one of the tools I use. But the goal is to make the product stand out, right? Like, who cares what it looks like in and of itself? So that's a cool one. I think I'm pretty fascinated right now with all like the companies that are rebranding like household products that you never even thought about. Like, for example, Graza with olive oil. They like are taking this thing that I've never even thought about once about the branding or design of it, and just kind of like making you rethink, like, oh yeah, like it is on my countertop every day. It might as well look a little bit better than it does. And now like they're kind of signaling with design that it's from a different generation of products, which is kind of cool. So I kind of see that trend happening a lot more with the physical product space, of just like our generation has different standards and sensibilities than the past generations, and we immediately look at a website or a product and we say, oh, that's cool or that's not cool, and I think that is actually like a pretty big trend that's going to happen to a lot of products that will kind of get repackaged in this newer aesthetic.
Yeah. And there's no one right way of doing it, right? Like, I think that that's really an interesting part of this. And also, if we want to, I know we're at the 30-minute mark. So, Brenton and rest of the team, if you guys want to have us start answering other questions, we can keep jamming, or happy to answer more public questions if you want to pop back on for a sec. Or Talisha, you can add your opinion too. All right. Well, I guess let's chat a little bit more. In the meantime, one thing that I think is cool about products like that is I also know that there's something that's worth thinking about, which is that a lot of great design that gets yassified like Graza sometimes isn't always the best at converting. And I think that that's like a really weird, interesting trend that I've seen, is that the uglier the landing pages, occasionally, like sometimes they convert better than something that's really beautiful and really pretty. And I think that one thing that you mentioned earlier, Tim, that I'm just curious from like your time before Nucleus or just designing in general, like how do you feel like your design skills have evolved over time? Like, and how have you, what opinions have you changed about design that you might have had before?
Yeah, I feel like I was kind of like grew up thinking like I can measure twice, cut once. Like I was big into carpentry as a kid, and so I'd always like think about like really thinking meticulously about a decision before doing it. Working at WAP definitely kind of turned that on its head, because it was such a fast growing startup, and there were so many engineers to designers that we were kind of more of like a cut twice then measure and see what happened type of company. And so that kind of made me like reconsider some of my I guess like opinions about design. I've become a lot more comfortable with like not knowing the best solution and just trying things, and ultimately being quick, like getting things out the door fast. Because obviously in a startup environment, that's like the name of the game, right? Is like trying to like get things to market before someone else does, and that's one of like the biggest values you have as a small team versus a big company, is that you can move faster. So I think that's like speed wise, that's been super important. In terms of like tactical skills, I feel like I've gotten a lot stronger and faster in Figma. It's been 8 years now that I've been using Figma, and every day I still feel like I'm improving, getting faster, which is a cool feeling. One of the funny things I did at WAP was like they made me every week bump up my track speed on my mouse, and so by like week 5 or 6, I was at like the fastest you can have on your trackpad on Mac, and like that's something that now I like have been encouraging all of my coworkers to do as well, because it actually matters. Like if you think about design as like playing an instrument or being really good at like sketching or something, right? Like back in the day, if you're an artist or a designer, like there are actually like very legitimate like hurdles of like skill set that you'd have to be good at if you even wanted to like have a seat at the table. If you're an architect, you had to at least be able to draft plans for a building, and those are kind of in a way maybe have been lost with like the keyboard and the cursor, because it's not as physical. But I still try to treat my craft as a designer in that way, where it's like I need to be spending time getting good at painting if I'm going to be a painter, like. And so I still think of Figma in terms of shortcuts, like I said, trackpad speed, all that kind of stuff is like things that I actually need to like continually hone and get better at, because it actually, materially improves the outcomes I've found, being able to like quickly do those things. So I feel like compared to like me, 4-8 years ago, I'm like way faster and more proficient in the tool itself, which is kind of boring, but it's like really important if it's something you do every day.
It's a good point. I think that's very true too. Like I remember I built my first website when I was 15. This was right when Squarespace, the first version ever, came out. And I made my portfolio in Photoshop. And I had to make like 20 different files because there was too many pictures and too many assets. And then in order to get them on my website, I had to like use all these weird janky websites to compress the photos to make them smaller. And it was a nightmare. And I think, look, we've come so far. Now you can literally type in Lovable, I want to build a portfolio website, and in 2 seconds it'll pop one out. It's pretty crazy. Like I think that that's also where I'm the most interested, is thinking about where is the human going to play a factor in design over time? Like, are we eventually going to have assistants or full-on agents that are running full design sprints on their own without us, based on some type of guidance, or maybe not guidance? Maybe it's just knowledge that they have of understanding what we're doing and what we're building. The thing that I keep thinking about though is that humans are very specious, and ultimately, like every LLM is trained not on dolphin language, but it's on human language. And ultimately, like the goal of AI is to serve humanity. And so I think something that we're going to recognize is going to keep coming out is that human agency is important. And just because you can build the most powerful tool in the world doesn't mean it has the highest utility. I think second, um, making humans feel like they're in control, which is similar to agency in a way, is very important. I think as well, like people are going to need to continue to build the core skills that go into using these tools, because it'll make you better at using the tools. So for example, like while you definitely don't need to learn how to use a map or an atlas to use your GPS, and you can turn it on, it will make you better navigator of understanding different routes if you did know that. And same thing with like a calculator. Like if you just use a calculator to know basic arithmetic, it will definitely be able to do things immediately for you. But if you had all the understanding of calculus and understood the principles behind why, you would know which quote unquote prompts to put in your calculator to make the responses faster. And I think about this the same way in design. Like ultimately, if you are going to be designing or working with any AI tools or even writing tools, if you don't have the ability to build your own critical thinking or discernment, you're going to struggle to come up with anything other than the average slop that it'll put out. And therefore, then most Americans, or most just people in the world, are going to take whatever is the baseline. They're going to write some really simple question. They'll say, write me this thing or design me this thing. It'll spit it out and they'll say, great, that sounds good, let's use that. As opposed to taking it and going 10 layers deeper and saying, no, I actually don't like this little thing, it should have been this way, I like this more meticulous, I want this to be conveying here, can we push the layer further? And I had this experience recently because I try to use a lot of the AI tools because I don't want to fall behind, and I also want to push the boundaries and keep my mind open. Like I think the fact that I'm 28 now, like I'm definitely not old by any means, but I'm not young in the startup world, and I don't want to stop continuing to iterate. And I think Mark Cuban's a good inspiration for me on that. Of just like he's just constantly exploring new technology, and he's much older, and I love how high his willingness is to like just fail and use them. And for me, when I think about writing or design, period, I think that like I have to continue to build the muscles and the skills, just like the gym. Like maybe the best analogy I have is, just because I can go over in the gym and look at that 100-pound weight doesn't mean that I can lift it correctly. And so if all the AI tools continue to get stronger, like I need to build a good foundation. I need to have good form. I need to know how to breathe properly before I even pick up that weight to use it properly. And that way, like one person could go and find a way to pick up the weight and get injured, but another could go over there and do 10 reps and be okay. And then the other one could go over there and use it and get super strong because their like connection to their brain and their body is so good. And I think about that with AI. Like a lot of the value is going to go to the people who take things 10 layers deeper. So, I mean, my biggest advice that I always say to the companies I work with is like, how can you push whatever you're doing like 5 layers deeper? How can you think more differently? How can you reintroduce other things of other parts of your life and connect dots that are not just in one lane and bring them over? Just like the art example, like you can draw from your photography background to Tim and say like, oh, I remember this, or I had this childhood memory that just felt good in my body and I want to feel like I can incorporate that. And I think that's a core critical part of design that gets missed a lot.
Yeah, I've like talked to a lot of designers and even founders, frankly, who are like scared of, what the future looks like with AI, and like they feel like they're losing their moat or they can't stand out in the noise. But I feel like that's always been a thing at the same time, like differentiation has always been a challenge. And that's one of the main, benefits of good design is that it can differentiate your product from the noise that's always been around in any generation. It's a different type of noise now, sure, maybe there's more of it, but that's always a challenge. That's always kind of like the superpower of design, really, at the end of the day, is like it can help you differentiate your product and stand out. Like I'm sure a lot of
Yeah.
people who are on Twitter have seen Cluely recently, and you can say whatever you want about them or their product or whatever, but they found a way to stand out in the noise, right? And like within a few weeks or months, they've grown a huge following. So that's just one example of like how it's still very possible to stand out. You just have to be creative and think differently, and not do what other people are doing, and be like brave enough to like do something unique that might fail, right? That's ultimately the hard part of it, is like you don't know if it's going to work because it's new. And so it's like kind of scary to like convince people or to do it yourself to take that leap. But that's usually what the best products and brands are. They're like it's like a risk that you take, and oftentimes it pays off because people recognize that and appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I follow Cluely pretty closely, and just like what Roy is doing in his team is very interesting. I also think people shouldn't get confused that like not everything is a design or a brand problem. Sometimes there are like core business problems, and people mistake them for being brand and design problems of like this isn't pretty enough or the language isn't good enough, but actually the fundamental model of what you're actually trying to sell or work on isn't even good in the first place. And I think that's really important. Like Cluely, while they've done an amazing job of marketing and doing a lot of brand work, their core fundamental model is like the biggest TAM ever. It's basically saying like anything that you would normally do in your day-to-day life, get like an edge or an advantage to the point where it feels like it's cheating, and we're going to be running in the background without you doing anything. So like it's a very, very high promise product, and they have a lot to fulfill to like make sure that they can achieve that. But I think you're right. Like that's why design and good design is not like black and white. Like you could think about Graza, but like let's say all the products look like Graza. Well, maybe then the old fashioned looking one is going to be the one that stands out at that point. So like I also think design is very cyclical, and being the first mover in design and being willing to take risks is always worth it, because even if it's something that people don't like, it will still gain traction. Take Cluely for even another great example. Like there's a lot of people right now who are hating on them, who are trying to expose their company for having different security things, or saying that their company shouldn't be vibe marketing like that. And like everyone's entitled to their opinion. I think no matter what, if you just look at the facts on the board, though, they're doing a great job of building discussion around what they're doing. And now it's up to them to prove that whatever they came out with isn't a farce. And I think that that's the coolest thing of it all. Like, well, no matter if you get hate or love, it's actually not worth that at all. It's just worth like, are you going to be obsessed with your customers and with the objective? And that's kind of what I started this talk with, is like design has to always have an objective, unless you're just an artist and you want to like make something just for your own interest. But like if you're doing design professionally for anything involved in capitalism or business, you have to work backwards from the objective at hand. And that should be like what you have your North Star at. And one thing that also I'm curious, Tim, for you, and this is something I think about, is like you should also be very explicit of what it's not for and who it's not for. And I don't know if you've had this experience in the past, Tim, or not, but like I know when I was younger, I felt the pressure of like this design needed to work for like every use case and every type of persona. And recently I found myself being very comfortable saying that this is purposely going to exclude this type of population because we're not working towards them. We're trying to help this type of people.
Yeah, totally. I'll answer this real quick and then we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that's definitely been a learning as well. I feel like one thing that we use internally is like we have like we talk about our customers and our stakeholders differently. So like for example, customers, someone buying the product, but like you said earlier, investors are stakeholders, they're not customers, but they're still important, right? And like the medical community is also a stakeholder in what we do because it's genetic related. So that's kind of interesting, learning to realize that. But yeah, I think to your main point of the question, like it really requires focus. It takes focus to say no to like most customers, so you can really like nail it for one type of person. And that's sometimes some of the strongest brands are like that, where you basically say no to selling to most people and really just focus on like what does this one type of person really want or really care about, and how can we speak just to them. And chances are that like other people also resonate with that, but you kind of have to like pretend that that's the only person you're designing for. So that's a quick answer to that. Shall we open it up for questions?
Let's do it. That'll be fun.
Cool.
Okay, you go first, Tim. Let's hear it.
Cool. List of tools I use daily, and for what purpose. Okay, so I've already talked about Figma. That's definitely the one I use the most. It's obvious, but it's true. Still an amazing product. I think it's one of the best pieces of software ever created. Um, let's see, ChatGPT, I've been using a lot more recently, and especially like the voice mode. Less so professionally, but I've just been using it more like, personally and stuff. It's quite amazing that you could for like you said, $20 a month, you could go walk around. Like I go walk around New York City after work sometimes and just talk to it for like an hour, which sounds so pathetic, but it's amazing. It's amazing that this computer can talk to you, and like it even like takes a breath so it sounds like it's human, and it'll laugh at things you say. So I think that's amazing, and I think we're just scratching the surface of what that tool can do. But that's a pretty insane one. Framer I use a lot. Our entire nucleus marketing site's built on Framer. So I feel like we're kind of like maybe getting to the limits of what Framer can do, but it's quite a powerful tool as well. I've had my eye on Figma sites for a long time, but for some reason, as soon as it launched, I kind of like lost interest. Maybe it's just me being, an old fart and being stuck in my ways, but I'm super proficient in Framer right now. And so it would take a pretty big improvement in what Figma sites can do to make me switch. But those are the main ones I use every day. How about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. And the advice I give to all my other designer friends is like, don't feel the same level of FOMO to just be using every single tool that drops every week online, because you're going to get a lot more value by going deep and picking the few that you want to get really proficient with, because there's always an audience for that. And I know this because I have friends who like still are amazing gods at After Effects, and they get paid so much money to just do animation work. For me, I use Figma 99% of the time. I use Midjourney a lot. I spend like many hours of my day in Midjourney almost every day. I still use ChatGPT as my primary function. And I think that like while there's other ones that are great if you're an engineer, like Claude and Anthropic and all the other tools that are out there, I think for me, I found enough use cases with it. I haven't had to use all the Google models or all of Perplexity's models to feel like I can get the edge that I need. So that's really where I spend a lot of time. And I love YouTube. Like YouTube is still my favorite platform, period, of anything. I think that it's just the best educational tool out there. And I learn so much every day. It's like my own university. So those are probably my core tools that I use. All right. How do you guys manage time?
I kind of view this as like a strength, not a weakness. Like I feel like I'm kind of like all over the place sometimes thinking like I'll work on something for 15 minutes and then completely switch gears and work on something else and switch back. Some people might like not work that way, but for me at least, like I kind of view that as a strength that keeps me kind of like always excited about what I'm working on, even if it's only for a short period of time. So I kind of enjoy like switching between working on like a marketing site and then going and work on the product, and then working on Framer, and then working on Figma, and then doing some copywriting and then coming back. So I think as long as you're like, energized, it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I also think that it's kind of the same concept of applying economies of scale to creativity. Like the more products that you've worked on over time, you can think about like people like Elon who are building 5 companies at once, but the learning that he'll have in one thing is going to always apply to the other thing. But for me, truly, like I actually have tried to say no a lot more. And I think that like the way to manage time the best is to work on something that you can do repeatedly and get very good at. And I just have that experience because for a lot of my life, I was trained to be a pro tennis player. And like, in order to be good at tennis, you have to hit a lot of balls, and there's no other way around it. You can't just watch videos. You can't just do this. Like, they're all a part of it. But like, you just have to have enough reps. And so I recently feel like the best thing to do is to focus on what has the greatest opportunity of me adding value, and how can I continue to learn and get better at that core thing. And that's why I've said like my core three are really like Midjourney, Figma, and ChatGPT, but the deliverables are all the same. Like I'm always starting with building the foundation of a brand and the visual identity and the writing side of it, and then taking those assets and building the landing pages and the decks and the business cards or whatever other activation things they'd want, and then actually developing it. And for me, I develop it on Webflow. So that's really been my process, is like using all these things to stack up into one final big deliverable. But it's a good question. Any advice for non-artists trying to make the simplest product to deliver? Tim, you want to go on this one?
I would say be weird, just like embrace the things that you like. You don't have to be an artist to like things in the world, right? Like whether it's music or movies or whatever it is, like just embrace whatever you personally like and what resonates with you. There's a chance that it resonates with other people too. And just embrace the weirdness and try to be more different than things you've seen online.
Yeah, and I think like if you say any advice for non-artists trying to make the thing, I would actually say that I think artists probably make more complicated things. So I would say if you're not an artist, it's probably easier to make a simpler product to deliver. Just gonna come out and say that right away. So like genuinely, the easiest thing to think about is like, what is the fastest way that I can give someone value? And you don't really have to be an artist, you have to be a problem solver to come up with that. And I think artists are great at working with constraints. They have a canvas, they have certain sets of paint, they might have certain tools that they use, and they don't go past that. And so I would really try to think about what are your constraints and like how can those constraints become your superpower? Because that's always what helps me too. That's part of the saying no thing of like, you can't always do everything under the sun, but whatever you are going to do, you want to go really deep and do a great job of it. Hmm. I use Notion. I don't think it's like the a dogma for me. Like I've used Google Drive before. I personally think that like ideally my dream life is to not really have to intuitively build 50 million systems for me to be able to run my knowledge. And so that's a sign that if I start needing more and more of those, that's a sign for me to try to simplify my life and to try to start saying no to other things because I don't think unless you're running an organization that's the size that Tim runs, like I just don't think that you need this if you're sub 10 people, you do not need some really complicated mega system. That's just to me overbuilding. I don't know, Tim, do you disagree? Do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, totally. I mean, ultimately, like if you don't remember something, it's like likely not going to impact your work too much. And so I try to like also,
Yeah.
focus on things that are worth remembering and kind of like be okay forgetting things that aren't. And that list of top things, because likely it won't matter anyways. I've also been, a lot of different companies of different sizes. And I've seen teams that use Notion and use Linear and use Slack for everything. And it's all kind of the same, It's like the most important thing is that like you and your team are like aware of the different tools you're using and how they impact your work. But it doesn't really matter which one you use too much. Even like at Nucleus, we have the debate of like, should we have one mega Slack channel where we talk about everything, or should we have all these like siloed ones? And like every 6 months, we'll go back and forth between those two worlds. And like we're kind of equally productive in both. It kind of just matters like that you're aware that it's happening and that you're like that the tools are shaping your communication style.
Yeah, it's a good answer. Story branches.
I would say in general, yeah, it's okay. It's certainly not okay, but like I said earlier, like design's how something works, not how it looks, right? And so I think ultimately, like, depending on what your goal is, like you just need to figure out do these two stories still kind of serve the same goal and the same story? You could tell two stories that are like competing with each other, and then in that case, I'd say this isn't okay. But it definitely depends on the scenario.
Yeah, Spencer, I mean, what I would say is that I mean, it totally depends on the context. Like, I think this is a question that I would maybe ask a follow-up question to understand better. But really, like, if I was just trying to answer it off the top, I would say if the same customer can go down different journeys of your product, then absolutely you can have two different stories because they'll match whatever the experiences are. But if you're selling one thing, like if you're selling an olive oil, and your goal is to work with a customer, like maybe you might have two different angles that you'll test, but there's going to be inevitably one that works better than the other. And so, is it worth it to do two? Sure, maybe you can. Um, but for brand story, I usually think once again, like saying no to all the potential ones you can do and going really deep on the one that you want to believe in is better. Like I think most of the value applies to like this power rule that applies in startups applies to design too. And I don't know, Tim, if you've experienced this at Nucleus. Like, is there one product of yours you guys have launched or done that like has drawn all the attention or all the interest that maybe you could go more all in on that you haven't? I don't know. Maybe that's a part of thinking about this branches too and focus.
Yeah, I feel like we've suffered from that a bit, and I think we could do a better job of like simplifying our value add. I think like right now we have like 3 or 4 different products, and in the future, the next year or so, we're gonna try to like simplify it to 2. So um, yeah, we're constantly trying to do that.
Yeah, cool. I have a hot take here. Like I used to spend a lot of time writing PRDs, and I thought that they were incredibly important. Um, and I think PRDs are actually more important for thinking and the depth of thought because what a PRD should be, in my opinion, the best ones are actually a list of really insightful questions that work as almost like a pickaxe to get deeper in your brain to understand what are the edge cases that might come up later that an engineer is going to come knocking back on our door and say, oh my gosh, this sucks. Like, I can't seem to figure out what's there. So if I was thinking about what to include, I would try to ask every question that I can interrogate myself about things that might happen based on these interactions and what needs to actually happen. And even if it's feasible, like one of the challenges that I had in previous design is that we would design something that's really beautiful, but then it's like not something that can be built. Like it's not something that even makes sense. It like can't be built. And so I would definitely say that like starting with functionality of like what is the core thing this needs to be, what does it not have to be, and trying to ask the anti questions at all points in time. That's always helped me. I think PRDs are also actually more important for documentation than anything because what they do is they document your decision making, and eventually, with all the AI tools, you can dump all of them into AI and have it continue to assess your level of thinking and also help you make decisions that are better. But I would use it more so for like the gym analogy of like getting better at thinking about design and product as opposed to like this is the only way to build product. Like product can be built anyway. Just take Lovable. Like you could write something in one sentence and it builds the whole site. You didn't need to write a PRD for like this site should include a layout like this, and that's why it exists. So like it should be used to the extent that like it's going to help you.
Nothing to add. No notes. That was great. Looks like we have time for maybe one more. Let's see.
I design for MCPs. I'm happy to go on this one if you wanted to.
Yeah, do it. Do it.
Well, MCP is like I think that this idea of the context framework for communicating between apps with AI is really interesting. Part of me thinks that eventually these agents are going to get so good that like you don't need to write in a specific language for them and they're just going to understand all the context around them regardless. But look, is it ideal right now in this interim to think about that? Maybe. If you had a big team and like you're able to go deep there, like might as well. What will the UX UI look like from 2 years now with AI? I think that that is a really impossible question for me to answer because I think even the creators, even Sam Altman, et cetera, Elon, I think they don't know because the use cases that get defined by the public are just that. They're defined by the public. And they might have launched something to think that it's going to be one way. Like OpenAI released ChatGPT as a research experiment. It wasn't even supposed to be like this is going to be the new Apple level company. And all of a sudden people took advantage of it. And so I think anyone who's making those types of forecasts is really talking out of their ass a little bit. And like it's very cool to think about UX and UI from 2 years from now with AI. I think there's a lot of clear examples of like all of the boomer older businesses are probably going to be continuing to try to evolve into this. And just like digitization, which really got sped up by COVID, I think in the next 2 years, I'm imagining more and more average people that do not understand what Lovable is or have never even heard of it are going to start to think about using these tools. So I think the addressable market's going to expand. And with that, there's going to be an even distribution once again, or an uneven distribution of people who are really talented going to the very top and getting the most value and everyone else just using them on the basic functionality. But UX, I don't know if it'll be all voice mode where Tim, like you said, has spoken for an hour with AI on a walk. I don't know if it's going to be glasses or if it'll be an AirPod like device, which I think is what leaked from Johnny Ive and OpenAI of like this auditory thing that you can speak with. I seem to think that like Morgan Housel has this framework of it's more interesting to bet on the things that won't change than the things that will. So like I would definitely start to think the opposite of like what is actually not going to change about UX UI. I think every designer is still going to need to deliver something that's easy to understand that eventually helps a user get to their end point. So no matter if this is AI or a designer or someone else doing it, that's going to be there. That's my take. I don't know what you think, Tim.
Cool. Yeah. Well, last question for you. I know we're wrapping it up. Where can people find you online?
For me personally?
Yeah, if they want to get in touch.
Oh, well, cool. You're welcome to follow me on Twitter. I think it's Jonah Salita, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like that's where I'm the most active in DMs. Although I am also on LinkedIn. You're welcome to hit me up there. If anyone wants to work on brand work and like you're trying to do things on top of Lovable, and you really want to like go for a home run swing, I will say that I'm really expensive working with me because I usually work with venture backed companies. However, you can email me at jonah@takeout.studio. But otherwise, like, yeah, shoot me a line on Twitter. I'm happy to help any of you guys. I know I'm signed up for a bunch of mentor slots as well, so I will do anything I can to help. And yeah, what about you, Tim? Where can everyone find you and all the things you're working on?
Same here. Twitter or X is at Tim Guiteras, TimGuiteras. And if you're looking to work at an awesome healthcare company, Nucleus is hiring. So hit me up.
do it. They're one of the companies that I really would put my weight behind, and I don't say that lightly, having worked in multiple of them. I think that what you guys are doing is very interesting, especially the embryo stuff. And I'm also just at that life stage where I'm thinking about what is it going to be to have kids, and one thing that I'll add at the end that's kind of funny is I recently I'm really allergic to cats, and I get cat immunotherapy shots twice a week. And eventually it'd be nice if my kids don't have to deal with that type of struggle, and I'm able to figure out a way understanding our embryos to not have that. So shout out to Nucleus and everything that Tim's been building, and it's so fun to get to chat with you, dude.
We'll work on it. I'll see if we can do a cat allergy test.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Welcome back, Brendan, Talisha. Thank you.
Thanks for presenting. Fantastic, and great to hear everything you're doing. Jonah just sold me on Nucleus, obviously. Gonna have to go check that out. Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. I'll just quickly say for our viewers, the task this week is to add or remove a feature based on user feedback, and to create a change log to record your testing that you're going to be doing over the next week. So for Tim and Jonah, it's 6 weeks. They've got a theme for each week, and next week is testing and iterating.
Rock on. Try to test and iterate every day, guys, not just 1 week. You got this.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good luck, guys. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.